Hi, everyone. I'm Haley Casey, and I'm an associate agent at Creative Media Agency. Um, you guys probably heard Paige Wheeler, our founder and co-agent and president, speaking this morning about what it means to be an agent. She's been in the business for a long time, and I've only been here for since November. So I think if I'm doing math right, about 9 months at this point. And so my schedule looks a little bit different than hers just because I don't have a large client list who've been selling books for a while. You know, I don't have series out. I don't have contracts on my desk all the time. We're still working to get there, but I do have 6 clients who I work with. So right now, my day-to-day is not only reading queries and request materials, although that's a big chunk of it, but I'm also actively working with those clients to edit their manuscripts so that we can start sending it out to editors. And I am working on pitching editors all of those books, those clients, those new things. So that's what most of my day looks like. We'll get to the point where there's a little more to it than that, but queries really are a big part of my weekly responsibilities. So we have a lot to say about what makes an effective query letter.
Absolutely. Haley said pretty much all of it. It's very good. I'm Shannon Snow. I also work with Paige and Haley at CMA. I am an associate agent and I've been, oh gosh, I think I started January, not this past year, but the year before. And I also have kind of a smaller list of clients at this point and looking to build, of course. And I'm actively submitting people, working with those clients on editing, etc. Pretty much everything that Haley said. Those are the things that I'm focusing on as well. So hopefully that is enough of an introduction for you to kind of get an idea of who we are and what we're doing. Okay. All right. So I'm going to kick us off, and Haley and I are going to kind of tag team this a little bit.
I just keep on walking, and this was like
okay. Somebody needs to mute, I think. Okay. So, welcome. Thank you guys so much for joining us with how to reach out to agents. Hopefully, by the end of this session, we will have been able to have given you a good idea of what we're looking for in a query. I know that everyone is here because they're serious about their writing, they're serious about their career path to become a writer, or if they're already a published writer, they're looking to build higher or and go to the next level. But if you're here, it means you're serious, and if you are at that point, then you're serious enough in the process to know that the best way to get to an agent is through almost exclusively query letters. There are other avenues that people do take, and some of those are, I've seen, the conference pitches. I've taken quite a few of those at this point. There are also contests that people can enter, and they can submit either a query or some material or a combination. And if it piques the agent's interest, then they can request more materials. And then you've also got your Twitter pitch events that happen throughout the year. And I participate in quite a few of those. And I did take on actually one of the clients that I found through a Twitter pitch event. So those are all good options to have. But I don't necessarily think you should rely on them, because the success story of that one client, I think, is a lot less of the norm. And query letters to agents directly are going to still be your bread and butter. But at the very least, having those contests under your belt, doing Twitter events, things of that nature, it really does help you learn how to encapsulate your story in 40 words or less, and really be able to answer that question. If somebody says, "What's your book about?" then you can roll that right off the tongue and very quickly and easily. So it's still a really good thing to be able to do those things. So first, one thing to know is that we receive many query letters in a week, a day, a month. I think that the three of us each receive anywhere from 200 to 350 queries a month. And when you look at that number just by itself and you look at a month's time, it may seem like, oh, well, that's not that many. But when you consider the fact that, as Haley was saying earlier, we are actively reading dozens and dozens of partials that we've requested, dozens and dozens of full manuscripts that we've requested. We are working with our current clients to help them edit their material. We are working to craft the pitch that we're going to make to the editor. We're looking through all of our contacts to find the perfect, most appropriate editor to submit to that particular project to. And then, of course, not all agencies have this, but we have the sub rights within our company. Haley does digital, I do audio, Paige does film. We have a subcontractor agent who does foreign. So we also have that on top of everything else that we're doing. So we're just, when you're looking at all that and 350 queries a month as well, it is a lot to keep track of and a lot to do. So we're not signing a new client every month. It's not that quick for us. It might take several months before we find the perfect project. And I know that on your guys' end of things as authors, it may not seem that you're making any ground getting an agent, gaining their attention. And that can be a little frustrating, but just kind of given the idea of what all we're doing, it's no reflection on you. It's we're just super busy and we have to be very, very selective. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. So, what this means for you is that you have to write a very clear and concise query letter. It has to capture my attention. It has to get me very quickly. Um, it has to be strong. It has to be concise, and it has to have all of the elements that it needs. Because if we reach a point reading the summary and it's not holding our interest, then at that point, I'll probably stop reading because I've got 349 others to go. So that's just something to keep in mind. Here are some reasons that might contribute to that and cause your query not to stand out. Number one, it's confusing. Let's say it's a confusing query, it meanders, there's not a clear, um, distinct type of blurb that enables me to know what this is about. It's like, I know that people have heard this analogy before, but it's like going into the bookstore and picking a book off of the shelf and reading that back summary. That's kind of what you want to write. You want to put that kind of a pitch into your query that encapsulates everything. And when you read the back of that book, it means the difference between you going, no, I'm going to keep looking, and saying, oh, yep, I want to look at this one. So just kind of keep that in mind. Second reason is maybe it's your query is just not explained well enough. We can't get a picture from reading the summary of just who your characters really are and what the conflict is. So if those things don't stand out, then even if your book is perfect and it tells all of those things, and if we were to read the full manuscript, we might find out that your characters are perfectly defined, they're gorgeous people, they're beautifully laid out in the story, and you've just put them together brilliantly, and your conflict is there and it's spot on. But if we can't see it in the query, we're not going to get to the full manuscript to find out that you did that. So that's the second thing. Third thing is that it may just be poorly written. Maybe it's too long. Sometimes there are some queries that I receive that they are so long, I tend to get lost before I'm at the bottom of them. or maybe it strays from the point way too much. And I can't quite sift through a lengthy query and figure out exactly what are you trying to tell me. Some authors spend a great deal of time explaining why they wrote this book instead of explaining the book and giving me a very clear understanding of what the book is, and they're not leaving room for that in the query. And telling why you wrote a book might come in a lot more handy when you're pitching a nonfiction or perhaps a memoir. But when you're talking fiction specifically, if you spend too much time explaining, well, I got the idea for this book because of blah, 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 and I decided that I thought I might write it because of blah, 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 blah. And then maybe in there you have a few sentences about what it's about. That's not going to give me enough of a picture of what your story is about and whether or not I would want to see it. And then the fourth one, and probably one of the most frustrating ones, is I might read a query and realize that the book is very similar to something that I already have on my list that I'm actively trying to sell, or that I've just acquired something that is too similar to it. And I can't have two projects going out probably to the same editors because they're so similar. They're probably going to end up going to a lot of the same editors at the same time. So the timing of that, it is unfortunate. But, and I always do try, if that is the case, to let the author know in my rejection that it's just bad timing. I have one that shares some similarities, and I'm sorry we couldn't connect on that. But if that happens, I do try to tell the author, feel free to submit to me on future projects though, because I enjoyed your writing. And so I'm trying to let them know, we couldn't connect on this project, but if you have something that in the future that you want to send to me and it's not something that I currently have something for that's similar, then I want to see what you did, because your writing sample below was good. So keeping those things in mind. And I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Haley, unless you have anything to add to what I've said so far.
No, I think that was all perfect.
Okay. All right. So I'm
Um,
going to turn it over to Haley from a little
Great.
bit.
So aside from those kind of basics of how best to put it all together, there are actually quite a few details that seem really obvious to include, but that people miss quite often. So this is just kind of a checklist for you guys. So go into your query, make sure that these things are in there because it really does benefit agents. The first thing is that if you're querying a single agent and not the agency as a whole, include the agent's name, who you're querying. Say, "Dear Haley Casey," or "Hi Shannon," or whatever in the salutation, in the email subject line. We need to know who the query is for, and it really helps if you get our names correct. I know there's a lot of spellings of Haley. I get it. It's not going to make me delete your query right off the bat, but it's going to make me hesitate if I see my name spelled wrong when it could have just been like copied and pasted over. With that, know that most agencies are going to ask you to query a specific agent and not the agency as a whole. I'm sure there are some out there that do, that say, send it to this email address and one of our agents will get back to you. However, most of the time, those websites are going to specify what each agent is looking for so that you can specifically pick out the person you think is the best fit for the book you're writing. So read those submission guidelines, make sure that's the case, and then go ahead and query a specifically at CMA. Query just one of us, make it clear who it is. While you're doing that, while you're perusing the agent's interests on our website, also go ahead and make sure that the agent who you choose is actually seeking the genre or the category that your book falls into. That sort of is an automatic no. We're very clear about the types of books that we're looking for a lot of reasons. I know for me in particular, I'm only looking for a few types of adult categories, adult genres. And it's because I don't typically love those books. So the odds of me falling in love with a political thriller that you send me are very, very low because that's just not what I read. and publishing is subjective. So it is a lot about personal opinion, and agents have to champion a book. And if it's not a book they love, and political thrillers aren't that for me, it's probably going to be a pass. But it also means we probably don't know that market very well. So again, if you pitch me a political thriller, it could be really good, but I don't know tons about what else is out there for that market, how best to pitch it, what the best comps are, who's buying those. And I can find all of that out, but I might not for something I'm not super excited about. So we do have those for a reason. So you need to make sure it's what the agent actually wants to see. And with that, while you're paying attention to genre and category, you're also going to want to make sure that the book you've written is within the expected word count for that genre. I know that that gets complicated and difficult, and it's really hard to trim down a book when you think all of the scenes really matter, or to add when you think you have plenty of information already there. But it's really difficult for debut authors to sell with a length that is really long or really short, because that's just not what editors and publishers are looking for. And in that case, established authors can be a little bit different. They are known, there's already been some money behind them, they probably already have a readership. And so they can mess around with that a little bit more and probably not lose people. Debut authors don't get that same benefit of the doubt. So if I see in my inbox a 90,000 word middle grade fantasy, I know that's too long. And I know that if I take it on, I'm the one who has to work with the author to trim down, in that case, about 30,000 words, a third of the book, in order to sell it. And it's not that that will never happen, but I have to be in love with that query, with those first 5 pages, with that whole manuscript in order to do that. Because remember that agents don't get paid, should not get paid, by the way, until they sell your book. So we have to be dedicated to that work on the front end, and word count is a pretty easy way to lose us in that sense. So we're going to go off on just the slightest tangent here for a moment and give you guys an idea of what those word counts, expected word counts, are for the genres. So we're going to start with children's. So the kind of the basis for that is picture books. Picture books really shouldn't be, for fiction, more than 600 words. That's it. I know that's difficult, but they're even harder to cut down. So try to keep it below 600, kind of 500 to 600. Nonfiction picture books, which are kind of like a history or a biography, something that needs a little more information, a little more fact, those can be up to 1,500 words. So there's a little more room to play in there. We're going to jump to middle grade. Middle grade books are usually for those 9 to 12-year-old readers. So they can be anywhere from 25,000 words to 45,000 words. That's just sort of in general. However, middle grade is also sort of split into upper and a lower category. So lower middle grade is going to be for those readers who are sort of emerging from picture books, so maybe a little simpler, a little shorter. In that case, you're kind of playing with that 8 to 10-year-old audience. So those books can be a little lower. They can be 1,500 words up to about 35,000. Upper middle grade, you're playing with that 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old who are sort of verging into that young adult territory without getting too heavy or too serious. So in that case, they can be a little longer, and they can be on that 45,000 to 65,000 range. In that case, the higher word counts are usually reserved for science fiction or fantasy books because of the world building and the explanation that needs to go into them. So keep that in mind. If it's a contemporary, keep it a little bit shorter. Then we get into young adult. Again, a little bit longer. You're probably looking at anywhere from 50,000 to 90,000 words. Again, the higher end is for SFF, and it's also for historical fiction because of that world building piece. Contemporary should stay closer to the 50,000, 70,000 words. And then if you decide to write in new adult, which comes and goes depending on which agents and editors are looking for it, you can play with the 65,000 to, again, 90,000 word range. Again, let me keep repeating, that high word count really is for science fiction and fantasy. A 90,000 contemporary is much more difficult, probably doesn't need to be that long. So keep that in mind. Shannon, would you like to talk about some of the adult categories?
Absolutely. So it's funny, anything from 40,000 on typically can be considered a novel, but it's, to me and many others, it's way too thin. And I would definitely want to beef something like that up. I think it would be considered way too short. Generally, for a debut author, you're going to want to hit in the ranges like Haley was saying that she's given and the ones that I'm about to give. Um, I know that if you were to go out on Google right now and you were to Google, how long should my novel be if I'm writing a blah, 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 you're going to get a gajillion, probably 20, 30 conflicting notions on what the word count range should be. So I'm giving you rule of thumb here, just kind of some basic ideas, as did Haley. So let's say you're working with thrillers, mystery, crime. Those would be anywhere from 70 to 90,000. Romance, women's fiction can go anywhere from 80 to 100,000, depending upon the market that you're going to be pitching. So if you're looking at your Harlequin Presents, which are much slimmer volumes, then you're going to be on the lower end of that, and not quite. They don't take publish Harlequins Presents that are that thick. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's depending greatly on the line that you're targeting, if you're targeting a line. Historicals are going to also be around 80 to 100,000. Horror novels are going to be anywhere from 70 to 90 generally, although I have seen some that are a bit larger. I myself took one on a few months ago that uh, I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. I just fell in love with it. And it was 167,000 words. And I knew what I was taking on at the time, and I knew how much work it was going to be. This is rare for me. Okay. I think that's really the only one that I took on and have taken on that has been that lengthy, where I knew how much work it was going to take to trim it down. So bear in mind that's not the rule. It is major exception. And we have spent the last several months going back and forth, trimming, trimming, trimming. And even as I was reading, and I was like, that can be condensed, that can be condensed, that can be, taken out completely, So just sticking within is a lot easier, because the chances that that's going to happen always are very slim. It's just very rare. Um, she did make it, by the way. She made it. Okay, so science fiction, fantasy, for adults, those, as Haley said, they're always going to give a little bit more latitude because of the world building that has to go into it. For adult, it's anywhere from 90 to 120,000. Now, Writer's Digest suggests anything that's over 110 is actually too long. But I think you can kind of squeak your way to 120, but no more than that. Honestly, just giving advice, I would say, as a debut author or one that is maybe just published and not quite well known, I would try to stick to the 110. And whenever I tell people this, people will say, J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, hello. And I'm like, yes. But if you think about it, her first two books were both slim. And then the third book, movies started to get made. So as that happened, her books then grew and grew and grew and grew until they became these long volumes that, blew this range out of the water. And it was allowed because at that point we had movies that were blockbusters behind us, and they're much more willing to put money behind someone that is a sure thing. And one thing to keep in mind is that the reason why passing word count is such an issue in passing over 110 is that it costs the publishing company more money to produce the book whenever it is longer than a certain word count. And for somebody like Rowling, who's got, movies that are coming out, and they're big blockbuster hits, and she's got a theme park and different, Harry Potter's all over the place, and all this merchandising, and millions of dollars are rolling in for the publisher and the author. They're going to say, yeah, this is a sure thing. So if she wants to do 1,000, pages, then we're good to go. But for anyone else, if you haven't gotten to that point yet, and I say yet because I want everybody to get to that point, but if you haven't gotten to that point yet, then it's best to play it safe, at least at first, until you do get there. And then also, if a novel exceeds the word length, it can sometimes be a red flag to both the agent and the editor that maybe it wasn't edited down well enough. And does it say something about the author's ability to edit? So that's kind of something that will kind of sift in your head. And I know that when I took on, just as an example, when I broke the rule and took on that very, very large horror novel, when I talked to that person, I asked a lot of probing questions about their ability to revise. And I wanted to make sure that I was working with someone who could do the trimming. I was very open and honest with her. I love this story. It's way too long, and we're going to end up having to cut this much if we make this partnership. Is that something you can do? So just kind of bear those things in mind. And that is all of the adult. I'll turn it back over to Haley, and she'll take the next piece.
Yes. Just real quick, speaking of adult, we're going to touch on nonfiction too for you nonfiction writers. So obviously, just like fiction, nonfiction has so many categories. Really, the general rule of thumb is make it novel length. Just as Shannon said, anything above 40,000, while short, is considered a novel. 40 to 80 is a really rough estimate. So that's where you should start with these. How-to and self-help books are going to be the low end. They're going to be 40 to 50,000. Then you kind of have those nebulous standard business and political science and history books that all fall into that nonfiction category. And those can be, again, that novel length. 70,000 to 80,000 words is pretty standard for those across the board. Same with memoirs. They may be a little bit longer, but they do read very much like novels, like stories, like narrative nonfiction. So they can tip into that 90,000 range, but 70 to 90,000 is going to be pretty typical. And then the longest nonfiction is normally going to be given to narrative nonfiction and biographies. There, again, so much information, history, research, all that stuff has to go in. Publishers know that. So you can start to get to that 100K word count for those. It's always safest to be a little bit shorter than you want to be, but those can get pretty long, as I'm sure you guys know. So just go double check what you're doing, what your book looks like, include that word count in your query letter, and try to make sure it's pretty well within standard, because it just gives you a much better shot with the agents you're querying. So we're gonna come right back off that tangent. There's a couple more maybe do's and don'ts of just general querying really quick. So one of them is, we talked about submission guidelines. We talked about getting their names right. Yeah, make sure that you're not sending those carefully crafted queries in a mass email. It's not an automatic no, but it gets real close, because if you do send a mass email, it becomes very clear that you can't be specific about why you're querying any single person in that email. You can't say, hey, Haley, this matches the website or the wish list or something I know you're looking for, because there's 50 other agents tagged on the same email. So I see that, and it makes me think you haven't done all of the research, but also that there's nothing in particular about me that makes you think I'm a good fit or somebody you want to work with. And in that author-agent relationship, that really matters. You should only be querying agents that you really want to work with, and agents are only going to take on authors that they really want to work with. So make sure that you're making that clear at the outset. Don't send a mass email, just take the time to tailor it specifically to whoever you're querying at that moment. And know that we know that you have multiple queries out. That's not to say you have to query me and wait for my careful reply until you send it to somebody else. I expect you to be querying others. Just make sure you're doing the same for them. You're going onto their wish list, you're finding out what they want, and you're saying why your book is a good fit. keep in mind while you're doing that, that you don't have to fulfill every item on my wish list. You don't have to say it's a YA fantasy with sci-fi elements and a dystopian world and it matches your 5 favorite Goodreads books. Like, it's all good. You can say it's a YA fantasy with strong characters and I'm set. I'm
I'll
interested.
agree. I'll agree with that. Yes.
um, so yeah, and conversely, if you do give me a really solid reason like that, I'm probably going to linger over your query. Oh, you saw that I love strong characters and you have strong characters? Great, tell me about them. I'm interested now. So it really does benefit you to do that. Also, sort of for your benefit, I recommend sending queries in batches. It's actually what we do when we're pitching books to editors. But if you send 5, 7, 10 queries at a time and you get a response, even if they're all rejections, maybe 2 come with a little bit of feedback, and you can go in, you can change your query, tweak it a little bit, make it fit sort of more what they asked for, and then send it out to new agents. And you're going to get closer and closer to getting a positive response if you take the time to sit with what you're doing. If you send it to all 100 agents you found at once, you can't really query them again with the same project. So you're not doing yourself any favors in that case. Yep, so my next point is follow submission guidelines. I've touched on that a little bit. Again, most of these things aren't an automatic no. It just, every time there's one of these, it sort of makes me pull back from the query just a little bit more. And I want to be all in. You want me to be all in. So if one of the first things I see is that the submission guidelines weren't followed, I asked for 5 pages, your first 5 pages attached to your query letter, and I didn't see them. Okay, it doesn't let me judge your writing, first of all, and it doesn't let me accurately compare what you've done to all of the other 300 queries I saw that month. But it also shows me that you didn't take just that little bit of extra time to go in, check our website, and include the specific things that we asked for. So it's not the best first impression. And because publishing is subjective and it is kind of like your interview for the position of a client of one of ours. So you want to make sure you're doing it right off the bat. And the submission guidelines are the way to do that. Everything should always be on an agency website for you to follow. And last, make sure you're including your, as we said, word count, your book title, and your genre. We get a lot of queries where the word count is missing. And as we said, maybe that's not an automatic no because it sounds interesting, but later we find out it's 200,000 words. And that makes it harder for us. If you don't tell us what genre it is, we don't know where you see it fitting on the market. So we have to be able to judge that marketability and where it will fit alongside other books. And if we can't do that, that makes it harder for us. So just those little details about the book itself, about where it'll fit with everything else, are really valuable to us. And with things like this, with that whole list of things, we're always going to notice if those things are missing. And while it may not have us reject you outright, we see it, we know it's there, and it keeps making us pull back. So just do those really simple checks before you send out an email. I am going to have Shannon jump back in and talk a little bit again about, we're going to get more specific here about fiction queries in particular.
Yeah. Okay. Before I say that, I do want to agree with that last point that you made, especially about book title. I'm always surprised by how many queries I read that don't have the book title. And I would think that that would be something that you would definitely remember to put in, but a lot of people forget. So double check that you did put your book title in there. So yeah, drilling down into some of the specifics. Obviously, there are certain things that we look for in a query letter. When it comes to the way you present your project and if it's going to garner our interest. We're going to start with some specifics about fiction, and then Haley will go into nonfiction, although some of what I'm going to say will be also applicable to some nonfiction as well. So first and foremost, we want to hear succinctly about your manuscript. We definitely want things to be kind of encapsulated. Think, just keep in the back of your mind the back cover blurb of a book. How long are those? They're short. Okay, so keep that in mind, and everything should be nice and tight. So we want to be able to hear what your manuscript is about and what makes it different. Keep it short, keep it snappy, while still also including like things like genre and your comp titles. I love to see comp titles, and you don't have to put them in the body of the summary. You could put them down at the end of your bio, or beginning of your bio, or whatever you want to do. But I love to see comp titles, and it doesn't have to be the kind of thing where my book is exactly like this one. It can just be my book, take the adventure of this one combined with the forbidden love of this one to make something new and unique. So you can take elements from other books as your comp, but having those comp titles in there, when we see those, it makes it so much easier for us to go, oh yeah, I can picture that. So that helps, because chances are we've read it. And so that's really going to help us be able to place your book. Oh, this is where that would go on a shelf. Great. So that helps to explain things a little bit better. Your premise. Obviously, we've got to have that premise, and then, of course, a short bio. Haley touched on this a moment ago, but I can't stress this enough. And I think I even touched on it earlier, but I can't stress it enough. Making sure not to spend in fiction queries, making sure not to spend an over just too much time explaining why you wrote the book, because then and making it too long, the actual summary, because I will get lost in all of those details of why you wrote the book, and I will get lost if your query is 2 pages long. So definitely that goes back to succinct and very quick, short, snappy. Um, so keep in mind that a fiction query is less about you than it is about the book. Your bio should just be a few quick little sentences with your credentials. If you want to include that degree that you earned, that would be fine. Any nominations from a contest that you've been nominated for or won, you can put those in there. That's always good to see. Um, it doesn't mean that if you've never nominated or placed or won a competition, that I'm not going to pay any attention to your query, and I'm not going to probably request to see more material, because if your summary is great and the pages that you include below are great, then I'm going to be all about requesting some more material for it. So it won't, you don't have to have garnered some pre-published accolades before I'm going to look at your query and take it seriously. But if you do have them, it's always good to include them. And then any publishing history that you have is always a plus. But we really want you to use the rest of the space that you have in your query to tell us about the story. And some of the elements that we're looking for is, first, a hook. So we want something to hook us in, and we want something that's going to make us go, oh, from the get-go. It's just gonna, oh, I want to find out what the rest of this is going to say. So hook us in, just like they always tell you in your writing workshops. When you're writing that first page, your first line needs to be a hook, your first page needs to be a hook, your first chapter needs to be a hook. Something needs to keep you turning the pages, right? Same thing with a query letter. Start me out with a good hook. Second thing is, I need to see insight into your characters and motivation. I want to have an idea of who your characters are and what they want and why, and what's standing in the way. So it may be perfectly spelled out, beautifully written in your book, but if I don't see it in your query, I'm going to assume it's not there. And I'm going to have to assume it's not there, especially since all I have to go on is 5 pages. So, it's just very important that you make those pieces fit in there. It doesn't mean that you have to go on and on and on several sentences about who your character is. You can figure out ways to very succinctly give us an idea of who that character is by putting in, some carefully chosen words or phrases, and then making sure that we understand what the motivations are. The third thing is main stakes. I need to know what's up for grabs. I need to know what is the main goal here. What are we trying to achieve? Who's trying to achieve it? I need some glimpses into the external and internal conflict. I need to know what your MCs are after, what those main characters are after, and but not just externally, but I need to know what they're wanting internally, what's going to make them feel better about life. You know, my dog is missing. I've got to find my dog because this is my seeing eye dog. If I don't have it, then it's awful. But on top of that, this dog, I love it so much. Internally, I would be lost without it. That's a horrible example, but basically, it does kind of give you a metaphor of that's kind of what I want to see. I've got the external goal, got to find the dog, and I know why. It's my seeing eye dog. And internally, I love this dog to pieces. What would I do without it? That's my internal conflict. So having all of that in there helps me to understand your character, what's important to them, what they want, what's standing in the way, and why they want it. Then you want a summary of the tension of the plot. And I think I've kind of said this, but more specifically, w- where what's starting the hero's journey, what are they trying to go for, and how are they going to get it, or what's standing in the way of them getting it. You should leave me wondering if they're going to be able to get it. So just like the back cover copy of a book that makes you want to go, yes, I want to buy this and take it home with me right now, my precious. You want to be able to do that same thing in your query letter. Leave me wanting more. However, that said, we get down to something called the rhetorical question. Ending with a rhetorical question. It's not an automatic no for me if you say in there, will she manage to stop the evil sorceress and save the world? But you really, if you did your summary well enough, that should be implied that that's the goal that she's trying to achieve, who she is, what she's trying to achieve. And that last sentence should be more of a cliffhanger that will imply that without actually imply that the stakes are going to be raised, and we don't know if it's going to be accomplished without you having to end on a rhetorical question. I also kind of, in while we're talking about rhetorical questions, I also think about that if a person starts out their query with a rhetorical question. But there's actually a great example of that in one of the queries that we're going to go over. And so I'll mention that in a little bit more detail later. So after that, ending your query with questions, though, it won't be an automatic no if you decide to do a rhetorical question at the end, but it may make me wonder if the writing is going to spell this out enough. Why do you feel the need to explain it to me by asking me the question? Did you not do it well enough in the summary? So, and then are you not doing it well enough in the book? So it's just kind of something to keep in mind. At Creative Media Agency, though, we request that you, as Haley has mentioned before, that you include the first 5 pages with a fiction query. She's going to get into some specifics about what we want when it comes to nonfictions, but with fictions, we want the first 5 pages. If we love your query, then we turn to those pages next, and we want to see if the writing style and the writing delivers on the query that you presented. So there have been times that I read a query and I see that, the query was fantastic, but then when I go down and get to the writing, I discover that the writing doesn't live up to how well the query was written. The writing may be amateurish. It may be littered with grammar problems. I may not be able to see anything being laid out in a very good way. Like um, it could be that there are fundamental things missing, or you're throwing in too much backstory, or your character doesn't even get introduced and yet until the very end of page 5. So I've spent 4 pages on setting alone. Maybe your dialogue is stilted and or it doesn't flow naturally. Those are all things that are going to pop out when I go to read the story. So there are times, however, when a query itself can be so written, and I go down and I read the 5 pages and they're fabulous. And so based on that, I may request more material. But then there's also the reverse effect. The query can be wonderful and then the actual writing doesn't quite live up. So we use those 5 pages to see if the writing is going to deliver what the query promised. And we're going to try to see if um, we have all of the elements that we're looking for. Is this person a polished writer? Have they, did they clean this up? Did they start well? Is their writing engaging? Is there a clear, distinct voice? Um, is theme, or setting kind of appearing? Um, we just kind of look for certain elements. Obviously, in 5 pages, we're not going to know the entire gist, but that's what your query is supposed to help. It's a partnership between the two things. Here is my query, but now see what you think of my writing. So it's a partnership between those two elements. Um, if we're intrigued by all of the things that you put in your query letter, your bio, your first 5 pages hooked us in, and we liked it, then we are, at that point going to ask to see some sample chapters. There are some times we'll even request an entire manuscript. It just depends. So if you don't spend time perfecting that query, then your manuscript might not get off the ground and get the attention that it deserves. So polishing the query, definitely very, very important. And Haley is now going to talk to you about some specifics for nonfiction.
Yeah. And all of that, aside from main conflict or things like that, are going to be very true for nonfiction as well. You need to be succinct, concise, polished. We need to hear your voice a little bit. We need to hear what makes your manuscript different, some comp titles. All of those things hold true for nonfiction queries as well. The biggest difference, I would say, with nonfiction queries is that, just as Shannon was saying, please don't spend pages and pages with your author bio for a query. We don't need to know that much quite yet. But for nonfiction, the author does matter generally as much as the book itself. So there's a lot more room in nonfiction to talk about who you are, what research you've done, what connections you have, what platform you have on social media, on websites, what groups you're a part of. All of these things that help let us know that you are an expert on the topic. And that could be a memoir, obviously, this happened to me and here's why it matters, or it could be a biography and it could be 10 years of dedicated research and all the, where you learned all these things, what got you interested. That matters a bunch. For example, if we hear that Mindy Kaling wrote a new book, we're immediately probably interested. If she's someone you like, you're hooked already. It doesn't matter what the book is called or what the book is about. Your interest is already there. So the same holds true for smaller, more debut non-celebrity authors. If we hear it's this famous biographer or this person who spent 10 years, figuring this out, or this person who went through the same thing, that starts to generate interest almost immediately for nonfiction. And that's what we want. And publishers will actually use that to their benefit when they buy your book, when they're selling it. They want to know what you can do to help promote it, to get like-minded people to be interested as well. So it matters not just for us as agents, but when we eventually go to pitch to editors, that platform needs to be mentioned. So we need to know about it pretty much right off the bat. So, keep your hook, keep all of that, but come back around to your author bio and let us know. And at CMA in particular, you can do some of that in your query for sure. but we do ask for pieces of your nonfiction book proposal in place of the first 5 pages of fiction. So nonfiction, when you're pitching it, and even when we eventually pitch it to editors, it doesn't have to be finished. It can be a work in progress. It needs to be well-rounded, well summarized. You have to know the beginning, the end, where everything is headed. It can't just be a nebulous idea, but it doesn't have to be a finished work. So because of that, you don't have to send us a finished manuscript, but you do need to send us a nonfiction book proposal. So in the query stage, what we're looking for is the extended author bio, everything about you and what you've done and your platform. And we're also looking for the marketing section of your proposal. So that's where you would sort of start to dive into connections, platforms. You have this many followers on Twitter, this many subscribers to your newsletter, but also here are the groups I'm a part of. If I am a biographer, maybe I'm part of this Southwest Biographers Club, and we meet once a year and talk in depth about our research, and people set up booths to sell, you know, their works in progress, their books. Tell us that. Tell us that's something you can use. Tell us about podcasts that you know have guests similar to you that you could leverage if and when your book sells. So we need to know that you've been thinking about the marketing and publicity already, because we can't do all of that for you. As an agent, I can't get you into those groups, but if you show me you're aware of those groups, that's excellent. That will be a big help down the line. So that's why we ask for those instead of the first 5 pages. And I've seen the first 5 pages of memoirs sometimes in place of that, because memoirs are maybe a little less platform heavy because they're personal stories. In that case, it's understandable, but it would be a good mention in the query letter if that's the case. So make a note of that, but keep those in mind. And then again, hopefully we love it. We're really interested in what you've put together and what you can do in the future. And in that case, we'll ask for a nonfiction book proposal in place of sample chapters. So that's really the biggest difference. And those are really the only 2 queries you'll be writing. So with that in mind, I just want to go back to something Shannon said at the beginning and just remember during this query process how much else agents are doing as they're reading your queries every week, every month, every day. What we're evaluating queries is important, and it's a big part of what we do, but it also has a lot, as we read them, our response has a lot to do with a gut reaction. Publishing just is subjective. It makes it really hard to be on the receiving end of that. But if it's a well-written query, I may still say no because it just didn't pique my interest the way I wanted. And that's not, none of this obviously is a reflection on you or your writing abilities. That's just the way it is. And it's why it matters so much that it is strong and hooky and voicey and has all the things that we asked for. Because if we get 3 paragraphs in and we're just not into it, we're probably going to start moving on. Like Shannon said, we've got 349 more waiting for us in the background. So it has to be quick. It is unfortunately also probably why you see so many form rejections, which again, I really do get it as an author. That's not a fun place to be. And we don't like doing that as agents. So my least favorite part of my job is reading a full and deciding I didn't like enough to take it on and having to tell the author, I know it looked like it was going somewhere and I'm sorry, but it isn't anymore. So we don't like doing that. The form rejection really is just because we don't have time every month to type out 350 personalized responses with personalized feedback to every single query. It doesn't work that way as much as we wish it did. Like Shannon said, hopefully you're getting some notes. Hopefully somebody says, this is good, but I just took on a project that's really similar. Or they say, this word count doesn't work for me, or I didn't get a sense of your characters. But that's why those form rejections exist. It doesn't mean that your query wasn't given proper and fair consideration, because it really was. We want to like the things that we get, I promise. So also try to keep in mind that if an agent isn't fully enthusiastic about your book, whether that's in the query stage or in the full manuscript stage, it probably isn't the agent you want. And I know everybody wants an agent, and that's not an easy thing to really consider as you work. But you want somebody who is going to be your champion. And so if they're turning down your manuscript, they really aren't that champion that you want and need. So it's possible just not to be the perfect fit for somebody. And you should only be, like I said, querying agents who you genuinely want to have a long-term partnership with. And it has to be the same on our end. So publishing is subjective, but what doesn't click for me, I may read a full manuscript and it doesn't click for me, but it is another agent out there who's going to find it's going to be their favorite book ever. So just know those query rejections, those manuscript rejections are not a comment on the quality of what you've done or the worth of what you've done. It's just, it's us. And you're going to find somebody who wants to be that champion for you, and you deserve that in your writing career. So
All right.
that's all I have. Shannon, is there anything you want to add before we either close or maybe answer questions?
I think that we have some questions in the chat that we might want to go back and look at. I can read them.
Okay.
So the first question that I see is, my work is now using tags for the email subject line. What should be in the subject line of a query letter? You want to give your opinion first?
Oh, sure. Again, if there is an agency guideline that says, please in the subject line put this or that, because you might be emailing an agent's direct inbox, do that. If not, it's okay to say query letter for title, or query letter for Haley Casey, or young adult fantasy query for Haley Casey. The importance of the subject line for me in our shared query inbox is that I know either the book title or who it's for.
Same for me. Yeah, we don't have a particular guideline of what needs to be the subject line. So honestly, if it has my name in it somewhere, that's better for me, because in a long list of queries that include Haley's and Paige's, it's easier for me to pick out the ones that are for me and go ahead and review them. So the second question is, should you include that it is a working title, or is that implied? I think that's implied. Thoughts?
No, agreed. Like I said, you're including the title doesn't at the end of the day affect how the query is written. It's just a detail. And so if your title isn't something if you don't think it's the best possible thing, it's still a title. It still helps to know. And we can always deal with that down the line if you become a client.
Okay. Is it worth mentioning if the book was professionally edited? I think so. What about you?
Yeah, it's probably worth it. Every details like that help. It lets us know you put in time and effort and thought, but also at the end of the day, it doesn't change how I'm going to feel about the query or the writing.
That's
So
true.
it's not bad to include, but it probably won't change my mind one way or the other.
I agree with that. Next one, I'll let you answer first. Maybe this is something I've answered first last two. I'm hogging it over here. Maybe this is something obvious to everyone else, but could you tell me what your definition of premise is?
Oh, yeah. So it's literally what your book is about. Like straight up, the premise of your book is this character is trying to achieve this goal, and here are the obstacles, or maybe it's happening in this world, or whatever little detail. It's really just you're telling us what the book is about. You're giving us a little bit of a log line so we know going in what we're reading, what world it's set in, and why we're supposed to be invested.
I try to think of it like a book blurb, pretty much. This isn't so much a question as it is a statement, and I'll read that before the last question that's listed. Jenny said, my favorite query summary I've heard mirrors what Shannon is saying. Laura Drake calls it include the book, the hook, and the cook. That's us. I really think that's perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So I thought that was worth mentioning, that that little thing that she had there.
Yeah, definitely.
You may have already explained this point and I missed it. My question is, should your manuscript be complete before you send a query letter? For fiction, I want to see it complete. I want the book to be complete for at least the step. Yeah. I'm dithering here, but then, yeah, no, I want to see it complete.
Yeah.
Nonfiction, as Haley was saying, I'll let you handle that.
Yeah, nonfiction really is up in the air. If it's complete, that's fine. If it's incomplete, publishers really do know and sometimes even expect that to be the case. So it does not hinder you at any point down the line if your nonfiction book isn't completely finished. And oftentimes a publisher will actually want to have some input in nonfiction. So that can be from reworking a complete manuscript, but it can also be done in those middling stages. So you should have some completed sample chapters, like a full outline. Again, we need to know, the beginning and the end and how you're going to connect those dots, but we don't need to see a full manuscript the way we do for fiction.
Yeah. And then last question we have here for now, but it won't be the last question we'll take. Are there particular types of books, genres you are looking for right now? Really?
I actually think, yes, I'm happy to say someone did post our manuscript wish list links in the chat. So you guys, I definitely recommend checking that out. That is in detail everything that we're looking for, and
Absolutely.
mine hasn't changed. So
Neither is mine.
so that would be the place that I go. It's also on our website under our little agent
Oh,
bio.
thank you. Somebody reposted it. There we go.
Perfect.
And
Yes.
we did have one last question pop up. Sorry if I missed this, but how many words or pages should the query for a nonfiction book be?
I don't really judge queries by pages, and honestly, I'm trying to think if I even know the general word count. I think typically I don't pay attention to a word count. It's normally a paragraph thing. I would do 5 or 6 really strong paragraphs for nonfiction. Probably that comes out to be somewhere between 500 and 750 words if you want to do it like that. But it really does need to be hello, here's the book I wrote. Here's why I wrote it or what's it about. Here's why an audience will be interested. Here's where it fits on the market. And then here's who I am and why I'm qualified to do this. And then your extended bio and marketing section attached below. So I don't really look at query length unless it is clearly much, much too long or clearly much, much too short. So 5 or 6 paragraphs is the best I can do.
Okay, so I guess at this point we're gonna jump into query letters.
Perfect.
So the very first one that we have here, I'm not gonna give names. I'm just gonna give I'm just gonna read what the query is and then give my thoughts. And then Haley's gonna give her thoughts and we're gonna kind of swap back and forth. So this one is, Dear Miss Snow and Miss Casey, if you are looking for a strong plot line and memorable characters, my completed mystery crime novel, New Territory, 83,000 words, might be of interest. Thank you in advance for your consideration. New Territory is the third in a series featuring the Santa Fe detective, Pascal Ruiz. Forgive me if I'm butchering that name, I'm so sorry. The second book in the series, Rights and Wrongs, was published in January 2021. That book ended with Detective Ruiz crossing the line and jeopardizing his career. We pick up his story in New Territory, where Ruiz is on administrative leave awaiting trial. Luis Sanchez, a duty officer, is asked to fill in temporarily. Ruiz assists her with the case under the radar while searching for his father's missing lady friend. Justine DuPont, a writer, and Camille Lautrec, I hope I'm saying that right, a costume designer, find themselves entangled in Webster Madison's murder. Justine DuPont, suffering from writer's block since her husband's Alzheimer's diagnosis, agrees to write an article on senior online dating. She accidentally swipes yes on Madison's online profile. Lautrec, Madison's college girlfriend, recently moved to New Mexico to write at the Santa Fe Opera. Madison, an attorney, was contracted to assist a financial company, Albatross, that the FBI is investigating. At the murder scene, Sanchez finds little to go on but $21 of play money found on the body and a crumpled photocopy of a woman in a trash can. New Mexico's multicultural mix of people, as well as the spectacular mountains and mesas, attract visitors from around the world. People visit for the sun, art, culture, scenery, history. Although travel books describe the state's offerings, fiction provides a better window to immerse in a place. I've experienced a book promotion and can organize presentations for small and large audiences. I've promoted Rights and Wrongs on Zoom, but I look forward to in-person launches. I have a website and an Instagram account. Also have a large network of friends and acquaintances, many who have read Rights and Wrongs anxious to read my next book. I came to New Mexico in the 70s to attend graduate school, but soon became enamored with the land of enchantment. I taught English and art in rural New Mexico before becoming a research scientist at the University of New Mexico. Since I retired, I've dedicated my life to writing fiction. New territory immerses readers in places I have had the privilege and opportunity to explore over the years. Okay, so let me give you my thoughts on this right here. Actually, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And if I'm looking over here, it's because I am reading my notes and I don't have a printer, so I did not print them out. I don't have a printer where I'm at. Okay, so the very first thing that I'm looking at is the very first opening statement. And I did say that I liked it because I think it's a strong opening because it sets me up for what I should hopefully expect. So, strong plot line, memorable characters, and the genre and title. Short sentence gives me a lot of info. So I kind of liked that. When I get down to the very first two sentences of the next paragraph, I feel that this could have been condensed and reworded a little bit because I think it keeps you from getting to the point and moving along a little bit. So instead of New Territory is the third in a series featuring the Santa Fe detective Pascal Ruiz, the second book in the series, Rights and Wrongs, was published in 2021. The book ended with the detective Ruiz crossing the line and jeopardizing his career. What about something like, and I'm not a writer, I'm just doing my best here. But what about something like the second book in the series, Rights and Wrongs, published in January 2021, ends with Ruiz crossing a line and jeopardizing his career? Boom. Then, in New Territory, Ruiz awaits trial on administrative leave. Boom. So it just kind of tightens it and puts it more into an active voice rather than a passive voice. And then I felt that the next sentence that starts with Luis Sanchez, a duty officer, is asked to fill in temporarily. There's about three sentences there about her and Ruiz. And I felt that this could have been condensed as well and put more into an active voice. And then lastly, well, hang on, two more things. The rest of the paragraph, I feel like I was getting hit with a lot of names. And by the time I kind of got to the end of that paragraph, I didn't really know which of these was the main character. Is it Rose or Louise, or is it one of the other people that are mentioned? So I need to know who that main character is. I need to know what their goal and motivation and conflict is. So is it the fact that he wants to get through his leave of absence and thinks that helping Louise will help him do that? Does she want to prove that she can handle this temporary assignment and it become permanent? Is that what it's about? Or is it about something else? And is the investigation that he's helping her with, is that the murder of Webster Madison, or is that and the other events mentioned completely different? So I kind of got a little lost in this paragraph to know who's the main character, who wants what, and why, and what's standing in the way. And by the end of the paragraph, um, I just feel like it kind of needs to be tightened up and condensed a little bit. And by the end, I'm just left with too many questions and not enough answers. And so I'm confused by what everybody wants, and it's just not clearly stated. And then I feel like I'm given a lot of backstory, but not necessarily the actual story itself. Does that make? I'm hoping that that's making sense. Um, I do think that the first couple sentences of the next paragraph about New Mexico could be condensed a little, but I loved the last paragraph. I thought that was perfectly worded. Um, might have been nice to include some comp titles, but otherwise, I thought that the bio itself was nice and succinct and told me everything about the writer, and it was very well worded. Haley, what were your thoughts about this one?
Yep, you mentioned a lot of things that I noticed as well. I'm totally with you. I think that first hook talking about strong plots, memorable characters, giving you the genre, giving you the word count. All of that was great. It was a really good start. And I agree that that last paragraph, the author bio, was a lot of relevant information. And yeah, it was totally well worded. Definitely interested in that. And even the paragraph before, I think that it was good to include, here's what I did for promotion on the previous books. So here's what I can and I'm looking forward to doing in future books. Great, that shows some of your experience. I'm totally down with that.
Yeah.
It is, that really does leave it with the chunk that's about the book being the thing that needs to be cleaned up. I agree with Shannon. I think it's too many character introductions and almost nothing about the conflict. We know what Ruiz is dealing with, but I assume we're following Louise Sanchez, and it's not mentioned until then the end of the paragraph what she's going on for this mystery. And the mystery really needs to be about, if you're pitching a mystery book, you need to tell us what the mystery is. Clearly state who died, why it's weird, what's difficult about the case, what makes it interesting, who's investigating. If you want to name a couple suspects, that's okay, but we need to know that chunk of it first because it's a crime novel. So tell us about the crime, was probably my biggest note. I did like, it sounds like it could be a really complex mystery with a pretty tight focus on just a few characters. And I like that about it. That just isn't made clear enough in that main paragraph.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Next one's you.
Perfect. So yes, so again, do our best to keep these anonymous. And this is for a nonfiction. It's actually pitched as an article. So I'm going to treat it a little bit like a book query. And I think a lot of those notes will carry over if the purpose of this is to get an article published in a magazine, newspaper, website. So keep that in mind as I critique a little bit. So this one reads, Dear Charlie, what is that ounce of prevention that could save your life when lost in the wilderness? Every year, hundreds of hunters, fishermen, hikers, and bikers become disoriented trekking in the outdoors. In my state of New Mexico, there are as many as 100 state police requests for searches each year. This article would discuss the steps to keep yourself safe, avoid getting lost, and what to do if you become lost. Most lost people found were ill-prepared for survival and had little knowledge of what to do to increase their chances of being found. The life you save may be your own. I am a 20-year member of the New Mexico Mounted Search and Rescue Team. I have authored 5 Western historical novels. Let me know if you have any questions on my article idea. Thank you in advance for your consideration. I think the bones of this are really good. I think that hook, every year hundreds of people get disoriented trekking in the outdoors, 100 state police requests for searches. That's all really interesting, and it gives a really good base for why this article or book matters, who it could help, who the audience is, why it's a big enough deal that there should be something written about it. I think that is really strong. And of course, the inclusion of being a member of the search and rescue team is a big deal. In fact, I would have loved if it was expanded on even a little bit more. Here's what I've done in that role, or here's what I've seen that made me think of this idea. I think all of that is really great. My biggest critique here would be there's not enough detail. There's no mention of why people become disoriented or what dangers you're going to speak about in this article. You don't give any examples of some of the steps people could take to keep themselves safe, or some of what you could do if you became lost. So I think giving hints of some of those specifics that you're looking forward to diving into that you think could be really helpful would be really beneficial here. And it doesn't have to be super long. It doesn't have to list every idea you have, but I would love to know, here's 1 or 2 steps that are very basic that could help people be safer. And I'm going to dive into more like that. I think would all be really valuable. So I appreciate that it's succinct. I really do, but I think this one just errs on the side of too concise. I think you could do more with the detail.
I agree with that. A couple things that I'd written down. The rhetorical question up above. Like I said, it's not a no for me to have a rhetorical question, but to marry this up with what Haley was saying about showing some of the things that that you've run into, that ounce of prevention that's part of the could save your life when lost in the wilderness, rhetorical question. Work that in to give a couple of those details. And then it wouldn't need to be a rhetorical question. It would be a part of what you actually are stating in your query. The second thing I mentioned was in just to say where it says in my state of New Mexico, I would kind of save that for your bio that you're from New Mexico and just leave it about the book right now. And
Mhm.
then you can fit more about the book and include some more details by just stating in New Mexico, there are as many as. And then you can expound a little bit more to give some additional detail. Save the part about I'm from New Mexico below because I think it is pretty clear that that's where the author is from what they say. And the last thing I said was that I loved um, the um, the fact that the author put in that they are a 20-year member of New Mexico
Mhm.
search and rescue team. So that tells me off the bat, this person is very uniquely and deeply qualified to write this particular thing, this particular piece. So I thought that that was very, very good. They do mention that they have 5 Western historical fiction novels published. I thought might have been a good idea to say with XYZ publisher or self published, just to kind of give us some detail. Other than that, though, I agree with all of Haley's points. I think it's very good, bare bones. Um, Maybe a little bit more detail, though. Yeah. Okay. Um, let's see. Our third one. So, I had to laugh right off the bat when I first looked at this one because the person addressed it to John Agent at Big Fancy Office Building. And that gave me a little chuckle because um, for me in my situation working from home at the moment in a little cramped area, I felt like, no, it'd probably be more like girl in the cupboard under the stairs. Yeah, that kind of thing. But that one kind of made me laugh right off the bat. So I was just saying that. All right. So the query says, how would you like the ability to travel from your body and wander the mysteries of the intangible world? Miranda can do that. She's the protagonist in my dystopian speculative fiction manuscript. Miranda's story is set in Sunbaked, New Mexico during the Second American Civil War. An invading government has split the country intent on spreading its zealous theocracy. Trapped between the war's devastation and her ruthless husband, she must use her special ability to escape and save her children. It's no coincidence that Miranda meets Merrick, an enigmatic doctor whose supernatural call to her across the sea went unheeded for decades. Staying with him is dangerous, as the new government will purge her and anyone who helps her. To survive, they must make it to America across the Colorado border. In the final passages, just when all hope is lost, Miranda uses her metaphysical talent to travel back to her former self as a teenager, giving her the opportunity to correct her mistakes and steer the country clear of danger. Out of Her Skin is the first installment in a series of books featuring Miranda and Merrick. Imagine Outlander's Claire Fraser and the Hunger Games. The manuscript is edited, proofed, and complete in 100,000 words. I'm a high school, lost my place. I'm a high school geology and astronomy teacher who holds a master's degree from New Mexico Tech University. For 8 years, I've been an active member of Southwest Writers, publishing in two of their anthologies. In addition, my 5 years of sales experience would make promoting this novel a pleasure. On your website, I see you represent ... and I believe we will work well together. I look forward to hearing from you. Okay, so my initial thoughts about this were um, right off the bat, um, the very first paragraph. I'm not generally a huge fan of the rhetorical question, as we've said before, but I feel like it kind of worked here because it's not really rhetorical. She answered it, or he answered it, whoever wrote it. So, how would you like the ability to travel from your body and wander the mysteries of the intangible world? Miranda can do it. So I feel it was answered. Um, I might have reworded she's the protagonist in my dystopian speculative fiction manuscript only because um, I think that just saying, I think all of that could kind of go down where you are describing the book, that paragraph where you've got your title, your comps, and your word. So you could say Out of Her Skin is my um, dystopian speculative fiction manuscript, the first installment in a series, blah, blah, blah. You know, um, let's see. I don't know that in the second paragraph at the very beginning, it starts with Miranda's story is set in. I don't know that I would waste words by saying saying Miranda's story is set in. I would just say, just jump right off with it. In some baked New Mexico during a second American Civil War, an invading government, split the country. Um, it just kind of makes it more active and removes the telling and gives us more show. Um, that said, the second sentence in this really captured my attention. I thought it was a great sentence. It's trapped between the war's devastation and her ruthless husband. She must use her special ability to escape and save her children. So, in one small sentence, I learned she's trapped between a war. She has a ruthless husband. She has special abilities that can help her escape. She has children, and her goal is to save them. So, there's all of her GMC right there. So, I thought that the author did a wonderful job in that paragraph. Thought that was great. Um, so the start of the next paragraph, it's no coincidence. How is it no coincidence? How do I know that it's no coincidence? So how would I know that? You know, I almost felt like that part was unnecessary and you could just say Miranda meets Merrick and start it off with that. And this is just kind of little things to tighten up because overall, I felt this was a really good query. These are just places that I'm pointing out where things could be tightened up a little bit. And I just mentioned where she says to survive, they must make it to America across the Colorado border, and that I liked that because the goal is clearly and concisely stated, and it's there, and she's wrapped it up in very little she, whoever keeps saying she. And then in the last summary paragraph, it starts out with in the final passages. I'd leave that out. Keep it tight and active. Start with just when all hope is lost and leave it at that. Because I think that would be a nice place to end. And then it wouldn't it wouldn't waste words is basically what I'm trying to say. And then lastly, I mentioned that I thought that they did a great job with their paragraph about the book. And this is where I would probably make mention of that it's a dystopian, etc. And then I loved the last sentence of, in addition, my 5 years of sales experience would make promoting this novel a pleasure. I liked the positivity there, that the author is positive about doing promotion and enthusiastic about it, which is something that a lot of authors dread. So it shows me personality and drive. And I thought that was not a nice way to approach that. And that's all from me. Haley?
Yeah, no, I agree with Shannon. I think, again, the bones of a really strong query letter are here. You do a really nice job of making it clear characters, goals, conflicts, all of those type of things. I also agree that the hook and the bio, all those things were really well written, and it definitely kept me interested. I think the biggest thing for me is that since this is a dystopian speculative fiction, there's a lot going on, and I didn't feel like maybe the world building was as good as the mention of tension or conflict.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways that you describe her special ability, a supernatural call across the sea. The new government will purge her. Um, Outlander. So there's a lot of kind of different ideas here about this metaphysical talent. I didn't feel like I truly understood what it was, how it worked in this world, if she knew about it, just sort of how that came into play early in the manuscript. And I think that for dystopian, it is kind of that world building thing. So that was one of the things that sort of made me hesitate. I don't know that it would stop me from reading more, but it left me with quite a few questions. The only other thing that I would mention is that your comps include both like a pretty epic adult romance, fantasy, science fiction, and a young adult dystopian. So maybe a little bit more about I assume the audience is adult because it's a character with a husband and kids.
Yeah, that wasn't clearly stated. That's a good catch. I didn't catch that.
Yeah, so no, that audience age matters. And so I would just even say, how is this character like Claire Fraser, or how is this world like the Hunger Games? Why are those the comps? And maybe even why isn't it an adult dystopian in place of the Hunger Games? But overall, really nice job.
Yeah, I think so too. All right.
All
You're
right.
next.
Perfect. This query is for a memoir for nonfiction. And so it has the author's name. So as I read, I'm going to swap it out with Jane Doe, unless the author just is totally fine with it, wants to claim it in the chat or whatever. I just want to make sure they have the same level of anonymity that everybody else has. So keep that in mind as I go. So this one starts with 2-page Wheeler, Creative Media Agency, query, stress as relative. So right off the bat, we're getting that salutation, the title, all of those things. So
she says it's okay if you use her name.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So in 1981, Ronald Reagan fired 11,359 striking air traffic controllers. It took 10 years to rebuild the workforce. The strike affected all levels of aviation and offered employment opportunities to many who had never before considered this as a profession. A struggling single mother of 2 little girls, Rosemarie Kern, heard a report on the late night news about the strike and the government's ongoing efforts to rebuild. With no background in aviation, she took a chance and entered a whole new world. Now one of the best known aviation authors in the US, Rose's experience as she faced challenges both in the job and in the attitudes of an entrenched, mostly male workforce make for a story that is inspiring and amusing. An air traffic control specialist, first for the FAA and later for Lockheed Martin, Rosemarie Kern has written over 1,000 articles on all aspects of ATC and aviation weather for both national and regional aviation magazines, including the FAA News, AOPA, which is Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, EAA Sport Aviation, Plane and Pilot News, IFR Refresher, America's Airways, The Atlantic Flyer, Fly Low Magazine, and The Cloud Bouncer. Through these channels, her articles reach nearly 500,000 pilots monthly. She is a popular speaker at aviation events throughout the country, as well as a guest presenter for the National Museum of Aviation during AirVenture, the world's largest aviation event. Pardon me. Rose is a member of Women in Aviation International and the Experimental Aircraft Association, Chapter 179. She is currently president of Southwest Riders. As part of her marketing plan, she will leverage her associations to enhance book sales, continuing her in-person appearances. Rose has a website. Attached is Rose's resume in the first chapter of her book, Stress as Relative. Thank you for your consideration. So I'm going to take a drink of water really quick. But overall, I thought this was a really strong nonfiction query. Like we had said before, I really appreciate how much emphasis is put on who the author is, what their qualifications are, the communities they're a part of, the writing they've already done. All of that matters so much, and it shows how active they are, how many readers they might already have, the platform that exists. So all of that is really, really wonderful. And I really liked the hook at the beginning. I like that it starts with that historical background about how Rose got into this industry, what happened that was her own inciting incident into this memoir. All of that was really awesome. Yeah, so I think what I would then say maybe needs work is making the summary of the book itself as clear and detailed as the author bio. So obviously we see how she starts, no background in aviation, no author, challenges in the job and in the attitudes of a mostly male workforce. All of that is a really great place to start, but I think you could even include a whole paragraph about what challenges, what are specific examples of a conflict. Excuse me, you guys. What are specific examples of conflicts that will draw in readers and keep us hooked, let us know that there is tension here and there. And importantly, how will this be relatable to modern readers, especially those who aren't interested in aviation? So those relatable moments about maybe working in a mostly male workforce or working in a brand new place, having these struggles, we need to know that that will get readers outside of those aviation connections that already exist. So for me, that was the biggest change that I would make. But otherwise, again, I thought this was a really strong query.
Okay, I have just a couple of comments. I'm not as good with the nonfic and the memoir as Haley is, but I did have a couple of things that stood out for me. One is I really loved the opening paragraph. I thought that it set a good background for us for what was to come, and kind of orients me into um, what we're going to be learning about. Um, I did note though that unless I missed it, I don't see where it's ever clearly stated that this is a memoir, and that may be obvious, but I would still state it somewhere in there just so that way it's in there, for people who don't
Agreed.
like me.
Mhm.
And then the next paragraph, my feedback kind of touches a little bit on some that you gave. I like this paragraph, but I said that I almost wanted to have just a couple tidbits, other than this having to settle into the male dominated field to let me know what the struggles were.
Mhm.
Beyond that, I just wanted to I just want to see a little bit more of that covered in some examples, maybe just a couple, something to give me an idea of what the book is going to be, what road the book's going to go down in, um, explaining those struggles and the things that you went through. And that was really all I had for that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Yeah, the note about genre, it was really good. I don't think there's a word count either, so that would be something I would throw in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't, good catch. Didn't see that. Okay. So let's see. Mine is, well, the next one is Dear Paige, Shannon, and Haley. When I heard about this workshop, I was thrilled at the opportunity to present my novel. Please forgive me if I butcher this. Cinefane, the Demon Slayer. This novel may appeal to both fans of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and K.F. Breen's Raised by Fire, and is written in as a multiple POV. Um, Cinefane Williams is a kick-ass teen dealing with a world that doesn't understand her, and I have written her as two selves inhabiting one body. At 6 years old, Cinefane Winters was banished with her demon mother, elven father, uh, and shape-shifting hellhound to the human world. Now, 10 years later, their secret may be discovered if Cinefane can't control her demon. The elf part of Cinefane tries to fit in. She attends high school, disguising herself to look like a normal human teenager. She struggles to cover the bruises from the demon's fights in an illegal fighting ring. As long as the elf can keep up their human disguise and her demon under control, everything will be okay. That is, until she finds that the demon's late night antics have placed her in the sights of a serial killer, and she becomes the main suspect in an ongoing murder investigation. Cineframe the Demon Slayer is 103,000 words with series potential. Thank you so much for your time and consideration. I have the complete manuscript available upon request. I look forward to hearing from you at your earliest convenience. Okay, so my thoughts on this one. The first thing that I noted was that they had included that it was written as a multiple POV book. I've seen some people do this, but not a whole lot. it's kind of nice to know, I think. Haley, actually, what do you think about that right there?
I think it's worth it.
Hmm.
You don't have to necessarily say if it's a single point of view, but it does help to know if there's multiple voices, especially
Hmm.
because then we know if you include a handful of characters in your query letter, that's we actually need that information because we will be following each of them.
Okay. My next comment had to do with the second paragraph. Cinefrane Winters is a kick-ass teen dealing with a world that doesn't understand her, and I have written her as two selves inhabiting one body. Um, and then I highlighted I have written her out. I would cut that out. Don't tell me, show me. So I would say just explain that. Quote, that happens to a girl with two selves inhabiting one body. Boom. You know, make it active and show it to me. Don't tell me that you've written it. Show me that you've written it. So just kind of rewording slightly on this, and it would, I think, improve it to give it, put me in the story and let me be able to see it. The next thing that I put, I had highlighted, she struggles to cover the bruises from the demon's fights in illegal fighting rings. As long as the elf can keep up their human disguise and her demon under control, everything will be okay. That is, until she finds the demon's late antics have placed her in the sights of a serial killer. She becomes main suspect in an ongoing murder investigation. This is good. The new conflict of being a murder suspect, I think introduces a new good conflict. But other than trying to fit in, which was mentioned a little earlier in this paragraph, other than trying to fit in, who will that secret be revealed to? So I was a little confused there. Um, who's her secret going to get revealed to? Because it says here, um, she can keep her secret if she can keep her secret concealed. Well, who's it going to get revealed to, and what happens if it does? And then how what's going to happen to, I guess, beyond the murder? What is the paragraphs leading up to, or the three paragraphs leading up to the murder? I kind of wanted to know how that is going to tie in with that last paragraph about being a suspect in the murder. So is that her main conflict, is just going to be that, or is there more going on? Why was her family banished? Um, that sort of thing. So I just felt like there were some details that were just left out a little bit here and there. I also noted that some comp titles would have been great here, just to give this very unique story. Um, and when you have a unique story, that's a wonderful thing because it's something new and different, and it might be a new take on an old trope and offer something new and different. But if you can't at least do some sort of little piece comparison, or I know that it's mentioned up there. Oh, I see. It was mentioned up above. I forgot. I'd pull that down and put it down there. And don't be afraid to put in a sentence or two telling us something a little bit personal about you. Just, just to orient us as to who you are. Give us some details about the kind of person that you are. It doesn't have to be anything big. I grew up in blah, blah, blah. I grew up here. I did this. I got a degree in whatever, or I didn't do a degree. I do this during the day, whatever the case may be. But that was my main feedback for that one. Haley?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm giving a lot of the same feedback, but again, I think the bones are here. I think you guys are all,
Yeah,
you've got such
absolutely.
good places to jump off from. You really do. So you get a salutation, you get the word count, you get the book title, some comps and author bio, sure, maybe a little bit better defined genre. Those things would be helpful. But you do start to give us some backstory into the character, a little bit of the tension in present day, and then the main conflict they'll be going through the book. And that's great.
Yes.
I do think it does start to become a little bit vague. So, what obviously we need to know: demon mother, elf father, two selves, all of that's really important. But I agree with Shannon that it seems like the murder investigation is going to be the main point of
Well, it's
conflict.
not done yet.
Oh,
Woo!
Um,
looks like somebody needs to mute.
um, Yeah, it sounds like the murder is where the story really jumps off. So what I would say is maybe trim down those early backstory paragraphs, keep the relevant information, the world building stuff. But I could use like a whole nother paragraph about the antics that place her in the sights of a serial killer and becoming the main suspect in a murder investigation, and sort of what that means for her, how that changes her day to day. Does she investigate? Does that mean this or that happens to her? Does she partner with anybody to try to deal with this thing? So what happens after that? I need to know. I would be okay knowing less about bruises from the demon's fights and more about the serial killer and how she got into that situation, and then can she get out of it? So that was my biggest note, Shannon. Otherwise, you covered a lot of things that I had written down as well. All right. So the next one, it reads, Sean's world is shaken when his best friend commits suicide, leaving behind a diary full of shocking revelations of abuse at their Catholic high school by Father Bruce. He joins the army to escape his demons and becomes a deadly tunnel rat assassin in Vietnam, but Father Bruce haunts him in the face of every victim. Sean struggles to rejoin society after the army, pushed to the brink of insanity by personal tragedy and PTSD. His uncle Mac, having earned parole from his sentence for manslaughter by joining the priesthood, convinces Sean to join him on an undercover mission for the Vatican. They work together to expose pedophilia in the Catholic Church until the mission spirals beyond their control. So for me, if I were to open this in my query inbox, probably the first thing I would note right off the bat is that it's too short. There isn't anything to sort of introduce us into the query, not, a salutation, anything. There's nothing that concludes it with a bio. And then we're missing that title, genre, word count, those sort of like main details that really help us establish where this fits amongst other books.
And in the bio.
Yeah, so we do need those things, and that's the first thing I would do when you revise this query a little bit, is put those things in. It can definitely be longer than these 2 paragraphs. It's not a bad hook. The first sentence, Sean world is shaken when his best friend commits suicide, leaving behind a diary full of shocking revelations of abuse at their Catholic high school. That's interesting. That has me interested in what that means for Sean, what happened, sort of where we're headed next. So I think that that's a good starting place. However, I would say that the summary in general has a very wide lens, which concerns me a little bit about the book itself. So we're starting somewhere in high school. Maybe the character isn't aged that way, but that's where the backstory starts. And then we're going all the way through a war, after the war, the mental health aspect, a new character, and then an undercover mission that spirals beyond their control. So that's a really broad lens to be shooting from, and that is difficult to do in books. So I would try to find ways to make that summary a little bit more, not concise, but really give me a kind of a timeline, so I know whether I'm reading 20 years of somebody's life or 5 years of somebody's life, and sort of really how those tie together, because right now they read as individual events and not a through line for an entire book. So yeah, so really I want to know why it's coming together, and I want more specifics about not just what's happening to Sean and, school, war, mission, but what it means, why it matters, beyond this friend's suicide, a little bit more of the internal conflict apart from kind of that mental health angle. So just beef it up a little bit in those aspects, because it could be really interesting. I just need to know more than I do now.
Yeah, I agree with all of Haley's feedback. I had also noted the bio, need for a bio. The only thing that Haley did not, well, she mentions it, but I want to go into a little bit more specific. So this is what I'm going to hone in on.
Yep.
I just kind of wondered, with the trauma, his world being shaken by the suicide of a friend due to revelations of abuse from their father. priest at a Catholic high school. I wondered what that does internally to Sean when his uncle decides to become a priest. And although he's obviously helping Sean to join an undercover mission, for the Vatican, it made me wonder, where is that internal conflict?
Mhm.
And does Sean struggle with that at all? That his uncle becomes a priest, which was something that kind of kick-started this whole thing when he's shaken over an event that involved a priest. You know what I mean? That caused something so traumatic that he had to live through. So I kind of also wanted to see more of the internal conflict, um, just kind of working in some sentences and giving it some framework. Few more details about what what we're going to expect about the character and who he is, what he feels. I want to see him a little bit more three-dimensionally, and that's pretty much what I had on that one that you didn't already mention.
Great.
Okay. And we've got one more that I'll do, and then maybe we'll hopefully have 5 minutes at least for a couple of last minute questions. Okay, so the one that I have up here is, Dear Miss Wheeler, the stench of rotting corpses filled Detective Anna Mangione, I hope I'm saying this right, Mangione's mask. She barely breathed, throat gagged, eyes watered as she studied photos collected at the crime scene of where the killer had tortured and butchered 4 young women. Never during her 5 years with the NYPD and now with the district attorney's office has she been witness to such horrors perpetrated by a murderer as she witnessed here. And then she put in brackets, opening paragraph to my first draft of a novel tentatively entitled XYZ. I had written, I'm going to kind of do this one a little bit different. I'm just going to give my feedback as I go. I actually loved that as an opening for a query. I was a little uh, taken aback to discover that it was the opening paragraph to a novel and not so much about the query. I thought this would have made a really strong query opening because it uses senses. I could smell, I could taste, I could feel. Lots of imagery to paint the picture of what is going on. I could see myself in it. And that I thought that was really great. The second paragraph, it goes on to say, my current draft has several different story threads that could effortlessly result in a book series. As a fiction novice, in the first third of my story, my characters run amok and got themselves involved with the Russian mob in a Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, who in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, whose viciousness would characterize the mafia as a litter of kittens. And for women readers, my story has a romantic thread. I got hooked on mysteries and thrillers about reading Donna after reading Donna Leon's Venetian setting murder series, Linda Farstein's ADA Manhattan murder series, and currently J.D. Robb's In Death Stories. I retired from New York government's $20 billion Medicaid office where I held a senior management position. Proceeded to study at York's Gotham School in Manhattan, sold my Manhattan condo, and have become an Albuquerque snowbird where good weather is guaranteed 350 days a year. I joined Southwest Writers and took writing classes at the University of New Mexico's Osher Lifelong Institute, where I transitioned, gosh, I'm getting horrible at reading right now, from analytical and legislative writing to more creative side of memoir and now fiction. A dozen of my memoir short stories have been published and won awards. Look forward to your presentation on Saturday. Be honored to have your agents critique my letter. Okay, so with the second paragraph, what I felt about the second paragraph is I felt that you were telling me about the story without really telling me the story, if that makes sense. Um, there were just tidbits that kind of make up that type of story. Um, I would edit this to make more of a summary of what takes place. Who is the main character? What is she or he trying to accomplish? What's standing in the way? Then fit some of your details around the answers to those questions. I thought your comps were great that you included those comps. So that kind of gives us an idea of the type of fiction book you're writing here. And so we have a good, clear idea about that. I did think that you had a really good, solid paragraph for your bio. I loved it because it showed some personality as well as credentials and other pieces that we might need to know. It showed that, you know, you have been published, you've won awards, things of that nature. So I thought that the bio paragraph was very, very good. Overall, I thought it was a good query. I just wanted to see more showing of the story and less about you telling me about the story, if that makes sense. Haley, what are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I completely agree with that. I didn't love the opening paragraph as much as you did. I think
I
because
love imagery.
no, 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 I think that was great, but I also am gonna read that again right
Yeah.
after the query
Hmm.
because we want your opening pages attached. And so for
Great.
me in particular, making that different and using that same ability to create imagery in a new way so that this paragraph is new to me when I get down to the sample pages mattered. But I also, as you were saying, it doesn't really connect to your second paragraph. And
Yeah.
I think that's where it kind of stopped working for me
Yeah.
because you're introducing Detective Anna and this particular murder and 5 years with the NYPD, and there's nothing about any of those people or events in this second paragraph. So I don't know if we're following her the whole time. I don't know if this murder is the basis of the book. Um, you know, hunting that killer, if that's just the opening and we're going to move into something else. Those two are at a real disconnect for me. And so I think that's
Yeah.
where my problem occurred. But I totally agree. It does feel like you're telling me what you liked about a book you read and not telling me,
Yes.
as we were talking about, the premise of this book in particular.
Agree
So
completely.
yeah, so I'm happy to hear, you know, there's a romance, there's some sort, it's definitely got that crime mystery vibe to it,
And I
but
obviously
obviously it's
from the
mafia.
first paragraph, you can tell that you can write really well.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
know, so if we had a good query here, if we had some pages, you never know, I might have requested it anyway, even though you didn't have quite the summary or the premise that I was looking for.
Yeah,
You never
agreed.
know.
Um,
All right.
yeah.
Um, does anybody want to ask any? We've got just a few, we've got 6 minutes left. Does anybody have any additional questions that you want to ask before we all go?
Can I just say thank you?
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, I'm the murder person.
Oh, okay, okay.
Oh, it's a good start.
Yeah, it
Well,
is.
thank
Absolutely.
you. I'm a new writer, literally of fiction,
Mhm.
but I have had over 20 stories published in memoir.
So
So
that makes sense. It makes perfect sense then how you approached your query. Coming from someone who has published memoirs, a query for a memoir is, as Haley has described, a lot more, a lot different, right, Haley?
Definitely.
Yeah.
well, thank you
Um,
both very much.
oh, you're very welcome. Thank you guys.
We have a question in the chat list. Do you have the query checklist written out? I'd love to print it up.
Did you mention a query checklist, Haley?
I'm sure I called something a checklist. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe this person can jump on and answer if it was maybe that first part of those like really simple guidelines, like query a single agent, word count, category, submission guidelines.
Now, she goes
Or,
on to say that you have
yes.
a query checklist with 10 points.
I suppose we could probably put a little checklist and over and send it to you guys to distribute.
Okay, and maybe
Whoever.
put it in our newsletter for next month.
Haley, it's your thought.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I
Haley,
could definitely copy and
that's up
paste
to
it.
you. Okay.
No, that would be great.
Yeah, put it attention rows.
Okay, will
Since
do.
you've got the office number, office email.
Mhm.
So
Here I am sitting there saying, yeah, Haley, do that. It's really me.
No worries. That'll be easy.
how long should a writer wait between the query and your reply before sending out the next batch of queries?
Don't wait.
Oh,
Hey,
I mean, I guess it depends on whether
Am I misunderstanding the question?
Probably not. It's
If
like they
you're-
send you a query out, the traditional in the old days, oh my gosh, you could only send to one person at a time, and then you had to wait for
Oh,
their response, so.
No, this might be, I think I talked about sending queries in batches. So if that's what you're talking about, you definitely can query handfuls of agents at a time. But ideally that batch querying gets you a few replies so that you know whether there's something you should be tweaking before you send it out again. But you don't
yeah,
have to wait. You can have out as many queries as you want to have out at any
sure.
given time.
I just assume that people are querying multiple people.
Uh,
And yeah, and the only thing I would just say, since Haley did harken back to that part of our presentation, is just to say, try not to mass query everyone all at one time on the same email. Yeah. Please mention one more time about the length a query letter needs to be, 1 page or 2. No, not longer than that. I don't necessarily think that we really put a guideline on the length of a query letter, did we?
I mean, no, we've said there is a too long and a too short.
Yeah,
Too long is when it strays from the point, and too short is not enough information. I think if you're typing it up in, let's say, like a Word document, about a page is probably a safe bet. 5 or so paragraphs, like it is a letter. So as long as you're
yes.
hitting those sort of intro, story points, conflict bio, that's plenty. So a page.
If you're clear, concise, and you have all the elements that we need, and you've got all the pieces that we've talked about, and the summary is good, if it trickles over onto page 2, I don't care. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. You're welcome for all the people thanking us for the feedback. Let's see, does the whole query go in the body of the email or as an attachment? I prefer it in the body. Haley?
Yeah, agreed. I won't not read it if it's an attachment, but it's
yeah,
easier. You can just paste the query into the body and
Scroll,
right
scroll,
below
scroll.
it paste the pages. And
I
that's
totally agree with
cool.
that.
So would you have the query in the body, but have the pages in the bio as attachments?
No, what we usually do is we try to make this clear on the website, but it's good that people are here to ask. They have their query letter in the body of the email. They even sign off, thank you, XYZ person. Then they'll paste their 5 pages right underneath that in the body of the email. And I prefer to see it that way because then after I read it, I can just immediately scroll down and I see someone asking, you don't want to get a virus. There is that consideration as well, but it's not that I'm not going to read it and open it because I do have virus protection software, but it's just easier for us to just be able to scroll
And it's
and see everything
possible
in
that
place.
it's possible an attachment will bump your email into some sort of spam folder. So not, again, I don't think necessarily for our query inbox, but I know sometimes attachments mess with the
That's true.
visibility of your email. So you don't want that to happen.
That's true. Someone asked single space or double space query letter. Single. It's fine for me. I don't care. It seems like everybody's manuscripts are double spaced though. So whenever they end up pasting their pages in, some of them tend to be double spaced, but I'm not picky.
No.
Should the bio be in first person? I don't mind that.
It
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
yeah, it doesn't really matter.
I
Doesn't
know
really matter at all.
for nonfiction, third person is how it turns out. And that's totally fine, totally understandable.
These are great questions. Anything else? We're right on the nose.
Hey, look at us.
Woo!
Wow. And we were actually worried that we were not going to be able to fill up the entire time slot. And but this was perfect. It worked out perfectly.
Well, thank you all. Thank you both. We appreciate your time. You've given us a lot of great information.
Thank you
And
guys.
you're welcome to join us. Our Saturday meetings and our third Tuesday meetings are always free. You can just kind of join us, and if you want to get a feeling for our people.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed being here. This was really wonderful.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Have a great day. Have a wonderful rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, wait, I have a quick question. Quick.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. All right, I'm
Okay.
here.
Speculative fiction. Will fantasy sci-fi usually take speculative fiction? Because I'm having a hard time finding agents who take speculative fiction.
Really?
Super narrow.
Huh.
You might be able to get away with querying some agents who are seeking fantasy or science fiction, but most do specify speculative fiction or magical realism. Because
Yeah.
I even have a client whose book
I
is
did-
a magical realism, and I think it's on my manuscript wish list as well.
I think mine says spec fiction and magical realism. If it doesn't, I'm gonna go look afterward. If it doesn't, I need to update it because it should. But yeah, I think they kind of they're a little interchangeable, aren't they?
Yeah, dystopian,
So
sci-fi. Mhm.
if we say one, we've said the other. Yeah.
Okay, so fantasy sci-fi kind of goes along with speculative fiction, dystopian.
Yeah. I mean, and magical realism is, I think that's where it's set in the contemporary, but there are things going on that are otherworldly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
no,
then,
I'm the
and
gal that
speculative too.
I'm the gal who can leave her body. I mean,
Mhm.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Gotcha.
so that would go with fantasy sci-fi too. So if someone's fantasy
could.
sci-fi, they might be interested in that.
Possibly, yes.
And you might be safer seeking the dystopian and sort of that sci-fi connection than trying to fit speculative fiction into one of those.
I agree with that too.
So should it be described that way in the query?
I think it depends. I think it's fine to call it speculative fiction and dystopian, but
Yeah, I
you
do
could
too.
include, because I see you're seeking science fiction, you might be a good fit for this dystopian novel.
Okay, perfect.
There you
Thank you
go.
for that last little, because it was so specific and I didn't want to.
No, no problem.
It's
Anybody?
amazing these days because we have all those terms and paranormal. We're going to be having a series of
Of
workshops
course.
in October that kind of goes over that whole where it used to be just sci-fi fantasy. Well, now it's midlife magical crisis and you know, paranormal and God knows what else.
So everyone should go to that workshop.
Midlife
Mhm.
magical crisis. I love it. I love it. Okay. Thank you guys so much.
Oh,
Thank
All right.
you.
bye,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great day.
You too.